So I'm not exactly certain why the first book report didn't film, but we'll try it again. See what happens. Thank you for being patient with me. And yeah, once again, I wish you all a thoughtful, considered Memorial Day for everyone. And remember everyone who gave their life for this democracy. Many of them wore a uniform, many of them didn't. I'm going to try this again. So my book report centers on The Barn by Wright Thompson, The Secret History of a Murder in Mississippi. And I wanted to begin my book report just understanding that what the author does, what Wright Thompson does, is he embeds the lynching of Emmett Till into the broader economic history of the Mississippi Delta. The region that we're talking about, the Mississippi Delta, it was swampland. And even at the time of President Thomas Jefferson, they were sectioning up land to be planted, right? Thomas Jefferson was a planter. He enslaved individuals to do the planting for him. And he wanted a nation built of planters, of farmers, of agrarians, right? This is the vision that he had envisioned for the United States. Now, it took a while to get the swampland cleared. Clearing swampland when there is no machinery to do it is a bit of a project, right? So there had to be investors willing to do this and to clear the land of the trees and things like that. But they eventually did, and what was underneath the swamp was this wonderful, rich, fertile soil that was eventually eroded because simply planting practices that eroded the soil and wouldn't build the soil back up. But it became that land became the economic center of that part of Mississippi, the Mississippi Delta. That economic reality cannot be separated from enslavement of African Americans, of Black people who were enslaved in Africa and brought over as part of the slave trade. Cotton, which was the main crop of the Mississippi Delta, it has had a precarious history, and cotton would boom and cotton would crash. It was sort of like the mining industry. And my friends in Elko, Nevada, my friends in Raton, New Mexico, they sort of understand that mining bust or boom concept, right? If the price of gold or of coal is so low that it's not worth pulling the expense to pull it out of the ground, then you don't pull it out of the ground and you start laying people off. When petroleum was discovered, people started moving fairly quickly, so that by what you saw at least by World War I and immediately after World War I, you saw synthetic fibers made from petroleum coming into being, and that literally just finally decimated the cotton market. Most of the cotton in the United States went to the UK, and their textile manufacturing economy just went bust. So that by Margaret Thatcher's times, factories and stuff were just completely closed. It just no longer existed. You could see some of this depicted in the film Norma Ray, which is one of my favorite Sally Field films. Because of the precariousness of the cost of cotton, what you do is you try to get free labor. How do you get free labor? You enslave people. Costs much less to abuse people and keep them in very, very poor conditions and keep them afraid than it does to actually pay them a wage to work your land. Following the Civil War, um, they had other problems. How are you going to make people who now had their freedom work their land for you, but not give them rights? You didn't want to pay them a living wage. You didn't want to give them ownership in the land. You didn't. No, absolutely not. Right? Well, then you came up with Jim Crow. And Jim Crow was a brutal system in many ways, equal to, if not even more brutal, I would say equal to, the system of enslavement that took place. Sharecroppers would get nearly nothing for the land that they worked. They had to buy things then from the store that was owned by the plantation owner. Oftentimes, they would end up in debt to the plantation owner. The plantation owner would say after their crops were brought in that, I don't owe you money, you actually owe me money. Um, um, it was just a very corrupt, horrible system. And it was a system that was kept in place because at least if the poor whites weren't making the rich money that the plantations owners and the corporations were making off the land, at least I wasn't black. And that's basically where the racism comes from. They have to be able to hold their head up high in some way. And the way that I, who is just as poor as my sharecropping black neighbor is, the one way I can hold my head high is to still be able to call them the N-word. We see a lot of that happening now. A system that has brutalized and diminished the middle class. Well, at least I'm not black or brown. And so I'm going to brutalize them. So Emmett Till came to the South. He was born and raised in Chicago. He was 14 when his mom allowed him, not without a lot of thought, not without a lot of fear. She allowed him to come south to visit his grandpa with his cousins. Now, Emmett Till, born and raised in Chicago, was schooled on the things that he could and could not do in the South. Number one, you say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, no, sir, no, ma'am. If a white person is walking on the sidewalk, you get off that sidewalk, and don't you ever, as a black man, speak to a white woman, ever. But Emmett Till had a little bit more freedom because he was never raised around that. Now, him and his cousins, after his cousins spent a day picking cotton in the fields, they had a little bit of money from picking the cotton, went into Money, Mississippi. It is very, very unclear what happened in the store. We really absolutely do not know exactly what happened in the store. But something upset the woman in the store who was behind the counter. Let me see here. Let me find what I'm looking for. This might be a little bit in, let's see, Roy Bryant. It was Roy Bryant's store and his wife, Carolyn Bryant. Something happened between Emmett Bryant and Carolyn Bryant. We do not believe, and there is no proof to believe, that it was anything flagrant. He might have actually handed her the money in her hand rather than sliding it across the counter, and that was enough to piss Carolyn off. We know that at some point when Carolyn got mad and came out of her store, presumably to go to her car to get a gun, Emmett whistled at her. We actually, some say a wolf whistle, some say maybe some sort of, whistle. We're not exactly certain what the whistle sounded like. What we know that was as soon as Carolyn grabbed that gun, the youth, their cousins, lit out of there. Later on in it, the kids thought that they were safe. It was a few days later that Carolyn Bryant's husband Roy and a plantation owner, J.W. Millam, and a few, maybe or maybe not a few others, took Emmett Till from his grandfather's house. Now, in those days, whites could enter black homes. They could just open up and say, "Get out of my way," and I'm coming in. There was, of course, blacks couldn't do that to white homes, absolutely not. But that's basically what happened. The whites came into Moses Wright's, Emmett's grandfather's home, and said, "Where's the boy?" I guess from Chicago or along those lines. They took Emmett from the house and from there took him to a barn owned by J.W. Millam, and they lynched him. And they lynched him in some of the most depraved and brutal, violent manner you can imagine. This was a 13, 14-year-old boy, and they beat him savagely. When Emmett's mom finally saw him, his eye was out of its socket, was laying down on its cheek. They had cut out his tongue and shoved it back in his mouth. They had somehow split his skull this way, so that his skull was in two halves. And then on top of that, they shot him. They shot him through the head. Once they killed Emmett, they took a gin fan wheel. You know those big industrial wheels that you sometimes see circulating air in warehouses and stuff? They took one of those big, huge gin wheels and with barbed wire tied that gin wheel around Emmett Till's neck and threw him in the Tallahatchie River. The authorities tried to cover it up. They actually tried to bury, once Emmett Till's body was found, they tried to bury Emmett's body almost immediately. And Emmett's mother, who was very well connected and very well respected in Chicago, was able to get the Chicago lawmakers, the governor's office, to call the governor of Mississippi and say, "You get that boy's body back up here." Now, the Mississippi authorities said, "We will on one condition, that you cannot and will not ever break the seal on that coffin." But they got the body back up to Chicago and the seal was broken. And Mamie Till got to see the brutality that those grown men inflicted on her son. And she made certain that the world saw what happened to her son. Wright Thompson makes the well-documented argument that the Mississippi Delta didn't just get this way. The Mississippi Delta that killed Emmett Till, that lynched Emmett Till, was created that way. And it was fostered to be that way. That is what enslavement does. And the thing is that enslavement allows brutality in the most disgusting forms. We are very much aware now of pedophilia. Well, pedophiles on plantations were able to simply do what they wanted to do with a young black boy or a young black girl. And there was nothing to stop them. It's like we never heard of that happening. It happened. So did rape. So did the fathering of black children. And there's this story that goes that white women in the South could see a light-colored black person and look at the face and be able to tell you who the white father of that black child was, that mixed race child was. But for some reason in their own home, they became colorblind and never saw it. And that's key to this story, because the way that Mississippi has dealt with Emmett Till, the way that Mississippi has dealt with their history of enslavement, is simply to try to forget, try to bury the truth of what took place. And I'm going to use John McCain as an example. Alexander McCain was John McCain's ancestor, and it was very well known that he had a white son and he had a black son, splitting the family in two. The white son, named John Sidney McCain, had a son who became an admiral, who had a son who became an admiral, who had a son who became a Vietnam War hero and senator. John McCain is the same rung on the family tree as Marvel McCain Parker, a sharecropper, a girl whose father and mother were sharecroppers, and immigrated during the Great Migration to Chicago, and who has fought vehemently for the memory of Emmett Till to be known. John McCain is on the same rung of the family tree as Marvel's father. In Teoc, T-E-O-C, Teoc, I'm not exactly certain how to pronounce that, Mississippi, there are white McCains and there are black McCains, all of whom share a common ancestor, which of course makes them one family. The mental and emotional gymnastics it takes to obscure that fact is roughly the amount of exertion it makes the modern state of Mississippi possible. During Senator McCain's run for president, he claimed he never knew his family owned slaves, which is spectacularly, absolutely absurd. Even in this modern day, they are trying to forget, conveniently forget, what their society was fostered to be, which is a segregated, racist society. I'm going to read to you a little bit about what a neighbor saw in terms of, or overheard. Willie Reed, who actually was brave enough, both Emmett Till's grandfather as well as this neighbor, Willie Reed, who was part of a sharecropping family, black in the family. They both testified at Emmett Till's, at the jury trial of the two men that we know. Like I said, we're not exactly certain who was in that barn particularly, but we do know that J.W. Millam was there and Roy Bryant was there. That's not in dispute. We know both of them were there. They both stood trial in Mississippi, and with cousins on that jury and a sheriff and a DA that wanted to make certain that this was swept under the carpet as quickly as possible and maintained that segregation of South, acquitted both of these men of this horrendous crime. Willie Reed, again, sharecropper, hid between the road and the barn as he heard Emmett Till cry out in pain. Emmett didn't make words, just noises, grunts, wild cries. Reed saw the green and white truck parked in front of the barn, which was also painted green. He listened. Then, helpless, he kept walking to the store. But he stopped at the sharecropper house 100 yards away. Family friends Alonzo and Amanda Bradley lived there, both sharecroppers. Black. They were the people Leslie Millam said owed him $11 after a whole year of work. J.W. Millam leased his plantation and was just a vile, disgusting piece of work. Just a mean goddamn son of a bitch. Amanda was awake and working on breakfast. Mandy, Reed asked, "Who they beaten to death down there?" She looked out the window toward the barn but didn't leave the house. It was nearing 7 a.m. She had a sharecropper named Frank Young visiting her. He worked on the nearby Zama plantation. Amanda grabbed a bucket and told Willie and Frank to go back to the well near the barn and fill it with water. They got there and started the task. They could still hear the beating inside the barn. Willie and Frank tried to stay out of sight behind the pump. A child's voice called out in pain, "Lord, have mercy." "Get down, you black bastard," a deeper voice yelled. The autopsy report would identify a broken skull, broken wrist bones, and a broken femur. An FBI investigator said it presented like pistol whipping. "Mama, save me," the child's voice cried again. Willie Reed and Frank Young remained behind the well. J.W. Millam came out to the pump. He wore a green nylon shirt and khaki pants and a U.S. military .45 in a holster strapped to his hip. After taking a drink of cold water, he went back inside. Willie strained to hear. The screams had turned to whimpers, and by the time the water bucket was full, the sounds stopped entirely. The sun was overhead, and the farm hands were getting ready for church. Willie still needed to get changed. He and Frank took the water to the Bradley house. Willie went on to the store. The men pulled a tractor out of the center of the barn and drove the green and white pickup truck in. They covered the back with the tarp. Willie shopped and paid and turned back. When he passed the barn again on his way back home, the pickup truck was gone. Roughly 3 hours had passed since Willie first saw the truck arrive at Leslie Millam's farm. The morning was still. The blood on the floor of the barn was covered in cottonseed, soaking up the proof. Willie Reed testified to that in court, and again, Emmett Till's grandfather also testified. Both of them had to be quickly removed, quickly spirited out of the South after that testimony. People started looking for them. Death threats started coming, and they both knew that they were going to be lynched as well if they didn't make it out. So as soon as the trial was over, they were both gone. They made certain to get on the train to Chicago. Now, we said who was at the barn. We know Emmett Till was there. We know J.W. Millam was there. We know Roy Bryant was there. We know Leslie Millam, J.W.'s brother, was there. We think that Carolyn Bryant, who was Roy Bryant's wife, was there. Only because Moses Wright, Emmett's grandfather, remembers a woman's voice identifying Emmett when they pulled him out of the house. So she might have been there. But you also have to understand there was at least one black man there, a man that they called Too Tight Collins. And Too Tight Collins was known by the black community to spy on black people, to then exchange favors with white people. So Too Tight Collins was there in some capacity, possibly holding down Emmett while the white men worked to torture and kill him. at that, you sort of need to stop and think about all this. The South has tried to erase, and they fought, oh my God, they fought hard to make certain that what happened in terms of Emmett Till was never made public. J.W. Millen and Roy Bryant, it was a farce of a trial. They got off almost immediately. Absolutely no justice there. And then the Delta went to work to make certain that the barn was forgotten, that the reality of Emmett Till was forgotten. They accused Emmett Till's mother of staging the entire thing, that the whole thing was a lie, that Emmett Till was still in Chicago, that his mother was still was just simply trying to collect more insurance money. It was sick, and it was depraved, and these were horrible, mean, goddamn people who instigated this. But the thing is that Mississippi itself has tried to forget. And now we're what? At least one generation removed from the lynching. And the people in Mississippi, the students in Mississippi aren't taught this. They have tried to make certain that any markers or any historical remembrance of what took place has been diminished or destroyed. And here I want to read to you about the historical marker that organizations have worked along with Emmett Till's family to make certain that nobody does forget. Now remember, Mamie Till made certain that that casket was open and that everybody in America saw what those men did to her son. That was a brave act. She got death threats. She attended the trial and was getting death threats. White children would point plastic toy guns at her as she walked into the courtroom and go bang, bang. This culture was fomented. It was curated. Patrick directed me toward a riverbend near Glendora. I shifted into four-wheel drive. We stopped at the latest historical marker his group had erected on the banks of the Tallahatchie River, reachable only by farm road. It was the fourth sign they'd bought, fashioned from half-inch thick AR-500 steel, the same material used in military body armor, only twice as thick, covered with a replaceable polycarbonate plate. That's all a fancy way of saying bulletproof. They had to install a bulletproof sign to remember Emmett Till on the banks of the Tallahatchie River. The first sign, paid for by Morgan Freeman, yes, the actor, was stolen and thrown in the river 6 months after being erected. The second sign got shot 317 times in 8 years, so riddled with bullets that the Smithsonian has approached Weems about displaying it. The third sign made it 35 days before it allegedly got shot by 3 Ole Miss frat boys. The ETIC, the organization, launched what it called the Emmett Till Memorial Project. A tug-of-war emerged, each side acting in the shadows, with some people trying to preserve a memory and others trying, with guns, to erase it. A fourth sign went up, the bulletproof one, and 2 weeks later a group of white nationalists gathered at the site to film a recruitment video. This was a hard book to read. You can see I have pages turned down, tons of notes. There's notes in the margins throughout. Yesterday was the anniversary of the freedom buses that went down to the South to try to register people to vote. 2 white young men who went down there to Mississippi never made it out alive. They were also lynched. If you don't know about that story, a fictionalized account is in the movie Mississippi Burning. Go ahead and watch it. It's a telling story. What they're doing in Mississippi now with the redistricting is again trying to erase the reality that racists still exist, that there is a Daughters of the Confederacy and Sons of the Confederacy organizations that operate in the South, that while not everybody in the South is a racist, it is quite clear that the white Southerners in the Southern legislatures are. This has nothing to do with partisanship. This has everything to do, the redistricting has everything to do with racism. Point blank. This is the legacy that they are trying to hang on to. The legacy where if I'm a white person and I have nothing, I can at least hold my head up high and say that I am not black and I am not brown, and I can call anybody I want the N-word or something, or any other derogatory term that comes to their head, because me as a white person, I get that privilege. It's a sick legacy, and goddamn everyone who plays into it. And this is MAGA legacy. This is it right here. It's a hard book to read, but it's a book that needs to be read in this time.